Sy Rogers is one of my favorite speakers, and I'll never forget the first time I heard him. It was in a church setting. His testimony filled me with the hope that if God could help him, God could help anybody. And now I'm really excited to present to you an inside, more personal look at Sy Rogers and his unique ministry. You had a tough childhood and you've been through a lot of pain in the experiences of losing your mother so early and not really being connected to your father. What's your relationship like with your father now?
I have a good relationship with my dad now. We were estranged for a long time. Part of that estrangement is because I had rejected him after my mother's death. People, when they hear my story, understand how that happened. And it's really sad. I didn't realize that I was doing this to him, that I was pushing him away. And then, of course, after I became a Christian and then wanted to reconnect with my dad, he was gun shy. I had so hurt him during my years in rebellion that he was gun shy to take the risk of being involved again. And obviously his heart was still quite tender toward me and didn't want to be hurt. And yet, thankfully, as I earned trust and we got reconnected and reconciled, we began building a new relationship. And what I love about that story is more than a story, of course it's my life, is that it did have a happy ending with my dad. And that I got to lead him to the Lord and baptize him at the age of 79. I've never seen him so happy. It reminds me of that scripture that his later years were better than his former years. That's certainly come true for him. And where his first marriage was tragic, and then he was separated and estranged from me, how we've been reconciled, and he's got a great second marriage with, I have a great stepmother, you know, who has been good to me and is wonderful to my dad, just like a whole new lease on life. So I've been very thankful to have seen that turn around for him personally. It's been great, and we're friends. You know, you can't go backward and wish it were like it might have been, but you can go forward, and I've certainly lived that in my own experience.
A lot of people who struggle with sexual brokenness also are afflicted with self-pity. Did you feel that way?
I think I wouldn't have called it self-pity. I think I used to wonder what it would have been like. You know, my dad did remarry when I was 11, so for a portion of my childhood and all of my teenage years, I did have a mom figure. And naturally, it wasn't the same as having my biological mother because there was that also very big gap of time from when she was killed when I was a small child until the age of 11. Yet, God kind of put skin on and intervened with other mother-type figures, a grandmother who was very involved in raising me, and that kind of intervention filled in the gap to a degree. I don't know as a kid that I was self-aware enough to, again, have called it self-pity. I think I used to ask God, why did this happen? Why couldn't you have made it different? I was aware of God as a child and wanted to know, why did this happen to me? I was aware of other people feeling sorry for me, but it wasn't like I felt like I was living in pain.
Didn't you feel like you got a raw deal?
Later. I think I felt more of the raw deal when I was in school, in high school.
Because of the way you were treated?
Because of how I was treated. And that was also true in college. I wasn't in college very long, but during my experience, it wasn't nice. And yeah, I used to think, yeah, this is a pretty raw deal.
What do you wish people would have done during those times, like in high school and college? What do you wish they would have done differently?
Been nice. You know, school's pretty vicious. And I know that probably some of my classmates would wonder that I would make such a statement, that they would think, oh, you know, I had a good experience, or my school days were some of my best, or college was wonderful, you know, well, you know, that's great. They were on that end of the spectrum, I was not. So, you know, it doesn't invalidate my view that it wasn't nice, and I know there's a whole stream of people who understand exactly what I'm talking about, who were there and been through that as well. And I think it is a shame that you're supposed to be getting this important educational experience, but having to go through this juggernaut of great emotional difficulty It's bad enough being a vulnerable, insecure teenager trying to find yourself in life and then get a meaningful education and navigate through all the additional stuff you have to wade through. It wasn't a good experience, but you survive and you learn. And I'm really glad to be able to say, especially to my youth audiences, hang on. It is worth hanging on for. It will not always be like this. Life may have given you a raw deal. Life is corrupted. Bad things do happen, but there is light at the end of that tunnel. It really is worth hanging on for. One day you'll be out of high school. One day you'll turn the corner. One day you'll climb out of that ditch, even if not right now. It's worth hanging on for. It's a wonderful thing to encourage people. And I'm very thankful that in spite of some of that darkness, there were moments of inspiration or encouraging people who gave me some grace that helped me to keep me keeping on. Very important.
You've helped a lot of people with your story, with your message, and yet you went through a lot of pain to get to that point. Would you say, I guess in retrospect, that all that you've gone through has been worth it because now you've been able to help people?
I always like to say, God takes all that manure and turns it into fertilizer. You know, I joke, but I had no choice about the setup in my life. And I didn't understand how I reacted to it. But I'm very glad that the Lord was able to take all of that, and somehow the alchemy of God's redemption is that He turns it into something, you know, that helps other people, that encourages other people. Indeed, in the ultimate cosmic version of been there, done that. But that there is hope, there is encouragement, there is life beyond brokenness and pain. We're made to mend, we're made to grow, we're made to go on, and you can.
Has that made it worth it for you, what you went through?
Yeah. Since I can't change it anyway, I'm so thankful I yielded to God. Best decision I ever made in my life was that I just stopped resisting Him. I often share, like in my story, Isaiah chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. Come now, says the Lord, let's talk this thing through. Let's reason it out. You know, if you'll just stop resisting me, you'll have my best. But if you insist on your own path, you're going to destroy yourself. You know, you choose. I want to bless you. I want better for you than this. I love that God takes responsibility for the stuff that happens in our life. You know, He did allow all these bad things to happen to me, but now that I'm yielded to God, He now has permission to take that bad stuff and work it into something good. You know, the inspiration goes back thousands of years ago to like Joseph's story, where he said to his own brothers who had so betrayed him and abused and rejected him, you meant it for evil to me, but God has worked it for good and to the saving of many lives. And so many of my heroes are people who've been down that very same path in life, like Corrie ten Boom, you know, where God, His redemptive alchemy, turned all that suffering and tragedy into something that's inspired countless people. What better use of pain than to find purpose and bring redemption through it? It's the classic story of God. And I'm just thankful that it's not just something you can hear about or read about, that I've experienced it, and anyone can.
You've been all over the world. You've taught, you know, I guess every continent. I don't know about.
Haven't done Antarctica.
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably one you haven't been to.
Although I'm sure they could use some sexual redemption messages there in some of those winter camps, but.
You've kind of, your ministry has really taken off to the point where you've spoken globally. It's kind of interesting, your ministry, because on some level you're a Christian celebrity to some, because you're so powerful and so articulate, and then on other levels you still don't get the respect that you deserve.
That's the way it is, isn't it? You can't please everybody. I think in Christendom we have a lot of streams of teaching and a lot of teachers. And you know, there are many articulate, commanding speakers, and we live in a highly mobile civilization where people can make their ideas known all over the world now, and in lots of ways. I'll be broadcast to an audience, you know, of millions of people in just one setting because of satellite and internet technology today. And there are some people who really, look beyond my obvious handicaps and they hear the heart of God through what it is I say, or they glean the truth from God, and they value that. It's the message, not the messenger only. And yet there are other people who can't hear the message because all they see are the flaws in the messenger. And so they're not open to hearing what it is that I might say. And I don't think that's unique to me. I think that's true of every speaker teacher. Nobody wins everybody all the time. So I've had to learn to relax and yield myself to God and walk in the light that He's presently given me. And I listen to the voices of my critics. I take criticism very seriously, maybe more than I should, but I do want to hear what truth is there in that even if my ego doesn't like it, I need to hear what can I learn that will make me better at what I do. When you live a public life, you are open to criticism, and there's not a pastor in a pulpit or a teacher on a platform that doesn't get some criticism. And it's very useful to hear it, not only to keep your ego in check, but to help you aim toward a higher standard and stretch and grow. Well, what can I do to be better? What can I do to serve people more effectively? What does need to be yielded to the Lord more that I'm blind to or comfortable with that maybe deserves to be challenged? That's part of living a public life, and if you can't stand the heat, you got to get out of the kitchen is really the bottom line. But the way I view it too is in a bigger framework. It's God who's called me into this. God is the one who opens the doors in spite of myself around the planet. It is ironic that I grew up being rejected and despised, and now, people affirm me, and it's a wonderful change of pace, I have to admit. But when people say, "Aren't you afraid that'll go to your head?" I have to remind them, I have a mirror, and I promise you I get lots of other feedback. And if it weren't for some of the affirmation, some of the criticism could be very, very destructive and say, I've said in my heart before, gosh, I don't need this in my life. I can hang up my boots and go get a job. I think it takes a lot of courage to actually live a public life and parade yourself before people as a living letter that they can, discard with contempt or that they can embrace and value.
I've personally been frustrated sometimes with people at some of the critique I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard far more than I have, about people saying that, well, if he's really healed, he'd be more masculine. What do you say to them?
Oh, I get that. Probably behind my back more than people would have the courage to say it to my face, although some people do. And on the one hand, it's a legit question when people are asking it, really wanting to understand. And I'm not ashamed to answer it, because I don't feel like I'm being attacked when people simply want an answer to the question. Why haven't you made more progress? And of course, the assumption is I haven't made progress. I think that's really an unfair statement from people who are ignorant of developmental psychology and physiology. I'm not making excuses. I'm the one that has to bear this more than anybody else. And so if there were things I could do to butch up more, I'd be open to that idea. I know what it is to fake it and act. That's not the same as being the real me, because then you're going to drop your guard, your mask will slip. There'll be some moment, when you'll default and the real will be revealed. And so I've had to come to terms that I will probably never please everybody. Now, most of the people who've known me for a period of time, they either look beyond all of that, and it's not an issue anymore, and they value me and God's call on my life. And they view it as like scar tissue. The wound is closed, but the scars remain. It's a consequence of my past. There are other people who very one-dimensionally think if you were more healed, you'd be more butch. But butch by what standard? I live and travel literally around the world. And I see various standards of masculinity. Which one are we talking about? The Arab standard, the Asian standard, the South American, Paraguayan standard? Or are we talking about the Chicago version or the Kansas City view? Or are we talking about in South Africa or in Italy? Which standard of masculinity are you wanting me to live up to? And of course, I grew up in the conservative American Midwest where men walk with a swagger and all of that. And I don't know that I'll ever be able to achieve it, but I don't know that God is asking me to also do that. And so, you know, I have made efforts that a lot of people may not be aware of. I've talked to voice professionals to pitch my voice differently so that I talk better. I've talked with experts, you know, and getting a better wardrobe and shopping more carefully. I've done things, you know, where I've had to force myself to hang with the guys and, you know, go to the auto body shop and go with the sports team and do things that stretched me out of my comfort zone to experience normality. You know, I've had to make a lot more effort to climb out of the deficit column, so to speak, that people who see me the first time and then react don't even give me credit for, even think about. So it's a humiliating cross I have to bear, and it's nice when people do look beyond it and don't care. It really is sad to me that the biggest amount of criticism generally comes from an American market. It's not an issue in a lot of other parts of the world. They don't even, it's just not an issue. But I belong to a much bigger market, and I most of all belong to God and His kingdom. And if I think God were the one that really had a big issue with this, He would be presenting it to me in a way that I could achieve success in. So yeah, I do work out at the gym, and yeah, I do try to be more conscious of stuff. I don't want people to be uncomfortable with me, but nor do I want to live only to make them comfortable by acting and pretending. Because there are a lot of butch macho dudes whose lives are a train wreck, whose sexuality and relationships are unhealthy. And if that were the standard of health, well, you know, why aren't they living up to it also? So I've had to think through and walk around that issue a lot. And it's nice to have come to a place where I feel some relief, where it's not the thing God's asking of me. And I will say, I really like being a man. It isn't a burden to me anymore, like it used to be, this thing I could never live up to, constantly failing in, never able to satisfy the standard. I feel relief now, and I enjoy being a guy. I feel comfortable in my skin, and I think that's quite an accomplishment, considering at one point I wanted to have a sex change because I felt like such a failure. Or I was always trying to connect with the masculinity in other men, where now I don't feel the need or compulsion to do that. It's a great achievement that, unfortunately, people who see me very narrowly never enters their mind.
You have such a terrific sense of humor. I've always appreciated that about you. How is it that you're able to use that in your ministry?
I get a lot of feedback about that. And Victor Borg said, humor is the shortest distance between two people. I think that's really true universally. I think my humor, on the one hand, probably evolved as a defense mechanism. For a lot of people, it does. A lot of comedians, you know, they have histories that are not easy, and humor was a coping skill. But I think it also shows a wit and a worldview that enables you to make the lemonade out of the lemons. And everybody appreciates it. And I think most of my humor, you'll note, isn't mocking somebody else. It is always pretty self-effacing. I'm usually taking myself to task. I think that also helps my audience relax with me a lot. It also enables me to slip the knife in and turn it more comfortably because, you know, I have to say some pretty challenging and confrontational things to people. I think if we really understood more of the inflections in the original language of even some of Christ's statements, there'd probably be more humor and satire than might seem as apparent in just reading it as dry text. God is a master communicator. And one thing that I find in my audiences around the world is that they almost always relate to my humor about the human experience, dressed up in my own history. And I think it's important. I used to wonder at some point, you know, is that right, laughing in the house of God? And is that right, laughing about these serious, deadly serious issues? And they are deadly serious. It's life and death stuff we're talking about, eternal life and death stuff. But sometimes the way to get you to swallow that medicine is to sugarcoat it a little bit with some irony and some satire, and a good dose of humor makes the medicine go down. Indeed.
What about, I want to talk to you about you becoming a parent. Like, what was it like becoming a father?
I think that being a dad is probably my best mortal accomplishment. you know, I was scared to death to become a father. I thought that I would be a failure. I was scared because of my history. I was scared for lots of reasons, that I wouldn't have what it takes. You know, my wife and I had been married for 3 years at this point. We were thinking about starting a family very earnestly, and we were before the Lord about this. And I don't know, Lord, what do you want us to do? And I don't care if your word says be fruitful and multiply. What do you want Cy Rogers to do? Do you want me to become a father? And I went to church that night, and this speaker was speaking, and the middle of the service stopped. The speaker pointed to my wife and said, you, that man next to you, is that your husband? And of course I said, yes, you know, what a Jesus, you know, what on earth is the speaker going to say? And then the speaker stopped and said, you don't have any children, do you? And I said, no. And then the speaker said, you've been afraid to have children, and God knows it, and God doesn't want you to be afraid. You will have spiritual and physical children, but don't be afraid. Well, I don't know about you, but I thought, well, gee, only God in heaven knew how I really felt, and God speaking such a powerful word of knowledge really affirmed and encouraged me. I don't know if everybody else needs that, but I surely needed to know this was what God wanted. And what a wonderful bedrock that's been for me in the challenges of parenting. At least I know that I know that I know this life is designed by God. And God would not give me that life. In spite of my weaknesses and failures and shortcomings as a human, He would not give that or entrust that life to me if I were going to blow it. So that gave me the affirmation I needed. And so our daughter was conceived not that long thereafter. And I'd say probably the joy of parenting has been not only the phenomenon, an amazing phenomenon of this flesh of your flesh growing through the seasons and stages of development and reaching adulthood. I have an adult child now. And as a young woman out in the world, you know, the joy of seeing her personality develop, her talents blossom, becoming who she is, and God's purposes beginning to be realized, and that we contributed to this is how do you put that into words? Especially when you consider from my history that just a few years earlier that would have never entered my mind as a possibility. And then I think the other great phenomenon of parenting is, for me, I've learned so much about God's character. I don't know that I would have learned any other way. And again, I don't think you have to be a parent to learn about God's character, but for me it's been one of the best object lessons, that if I could love my daughter more than she will ever know until she has her own kid, how much more is God like that? I've learned a lot more about relaxing, not with sin, but with humanity. I've learned a lot more about relaxing in the love of the Father, that if He can love me through poopy diapers and poopy attitudes, you know, because I've loved my daughter through poopy diapers and poopy attitudes. I get it now. And it's really brought me nearer God. I can see why He designed the system like He did. That as Jesus said, if you who are corrupt know how to give good gifts to your kid, what about your Father in heaven? I understand it now in a way that just was only words on a page before. Now I get it. And that's probably been the two biggest blessings of being a parent.
Were you afraid to become a husband? Did that threaten you getting married?
Yeah, I was afraid to get married. I feared everything. Would I be able to perform sexually, considering my history? Would I be a good lover? Would she be, you know, able to enjoy that kind of experience? Because that's what she would want. She wouldn't want a platonic friend. She would want a lover. Would I be able to be the kind of husband that she would need, even apart from lover? Would I satisfy her expectations? And would I satisfy God's expectations? Would I satisfy the community's expectations? No wonder they call it cold feet. And one thing that really helped me, you know, was when I began to talk to my straight friends, the ones who had never been gay, and I began talking with them and hearing from their histories what their fears were as they approached their wedding day, and that their anxieties were really no different than mine. That really helped me feel normal. I could relate to hearing their testimonies of insecurity and inadequacy, but they didn't let fear stop them. And I am really so thankful I didn't, because I've been married for over 2 decades. And, you know, we've had to go through stressful times. We've gone through seasons of bliss and seasons of difficulty, like all married couples do. And I think married couples all ought to belong to a support group, just like I believe all parents should belong to support groups, because we need the wisdom, the collective wisdom of the experience of others who've been further down the path to encourage us that we are normal, this is typical, we are human, and we have faults and flaws, and all of it is addressable, can be resolved, and is worth making that effort. I've loved going on in relationship with Karen, pushing through difficult seasons, because it's really what makes your marriage so rich, is that we've weathered it. We've been life partners through stuff. I love that old saying, a good marriage is where both parties believe they got better than they deserve. And I'd say that's really my testimony about my wife, who has shared this remarkable, strange whirlwind of a life in ministry, that I could not do what I do if she were not 100% right there backing me up, sharing it and believing in what it is that I do and God's call. I'm very thankful. And I asked her once, I said, honey, I'm at this plateau in my life and I really love what I do. I love my ministry. I love to encourage people through teaching insights about God's character. Are you content? Is this what you dreamed about? Is this what you, imagined your life would become? She said, when I was a girl, I always knew that my life would be marked by what my husband did. And I am living it. It really relieved me enormously to know she's just not fulfilling her wifely duty. She is on board, and it's been part of her destiny. So while a lot of people don't know my wife and she's not living on the stage of public life, as is the case in some ministries, her amazing ministry occurs by being off camera and off stage and right there, though, behind me, because I couldn't do what I do if she weren't. That's been marvelous to experience. She gives me normality.
Did you ever aspire to be in ministry to the degree that you are now? Like, I know you were in ministry starting out on you were behind the scenes, you said a janitor and then a file clerk, and we make jokes about it, but like, you're in the forefront. And what was your ambition there? Did you have any?
When I was first born again, I moved away from where I used to live, and I moved to another community, probably about an hour and a half away, to kind of rebuild my life and give me some distance from the community I'd been so involved with. I didn't know what to do. I was literally starting over. I had lost my job. I had no bank account. I had burned my wardrobe, so to speak, I had been living as a woman in preparation for a sex change, and now I was living as a guy, and I had like 4 shirts and a pair of jeans, and that was it to my name, and I had to go get a job, and all these doors kept closing. I was overqualified or underqualified, and I couldn't get a job anywhere. It was very disheartening, and yet God was using it like a narrowing effect, shutting this door and this door and this door and this door till He got me right to the one door He wanted open for me. And that's where I began to volunteer at a ministry. I'd gone to a Christian bookstore saying, do you guys know anybody who needs some help where I can get a job? And they said, well, we can't use any help here, but I know of this ministry, and they're looking for volunteers. They've gotten a brand new 20,000 square foot building. They need a lot of janitorial assistance to get it cleaned up. And I thought, well, maybe if I volunteer my time, since I've got so much blank time, this will be good for me, and God will bless it, And I showed up at work, and they put me to work, and my first illustrious job was as a janitor, and I was only making $50 a month. Very humble circumstances. But one thing does lead to another in the kingdom of God. Faithful at this level opens doors at another. I didn't really have a deep ambition like, I want to be a global speaker. It never entered my mind that my life would unfold like it did. But I guess after about my 3rd year in ministry, I began to get inklings. People would come up to me and say the most amazing things. That, do you know you have a tremendous anointing? Or, do you know I had a dream about you and God told me this? Or, the Lord spoke to me in prayer and wanted me to bring this note to you. And so I began to, like Mary, I began to collect these things and hold them in my heart. One after the other kept coming to me. And then one day, it all kind of broke loose, I suppose, in 1984, when several Christian magazines kind of simultaneously decided to publish my story. Charisma, Christianity Today, and the Last Days newsletter, and Voice magazine, all kind of like this media collective, launched me into a ministry that just has never stopped. And I think at the end of the day, while at first it seemed to be about, you know, I came out of the gay life and you can too, then it began to be more like God brings redemption to our sexuality. Even now, beyond that, it's really like you and God, be in relationship with God. It all comes down to that anyway, doesn't it? I can't really solve people's problems, and I don't have all the insight, you know, but all I can do, and I really do strive to, is to encourage people to come near God, to stop resisting Him, but yield to Him. That's really all it is I do. I'm a glorified waiter who takes the bread God gave me and I turn around and I give it to other people, that they can feed on it, that they can be encouraged. It's not about self-improvement or even recovery. Not that those aren't worthwhile or attainable. It's really about growing in relationship with God.
A lot of people are surprised to find that you're also a musician. Can you tell me about your music ministry?
My music, you know, I came from a very musical family on both sides. My dad's side and my biological mother's side are very musical people. And I undoubtedly have that musical gifting too. I did play the saxophone in school, in high school. Of course, it was before the sax was cool. It kind of only added to my geek factor then. Yet, that creativity was there. I didn't really take up music in my kind of secular life. I think I was, in my pre-Christian days, consumed by the nature of my problems and lifestyle. That was my big preoccupation, and it distracted me from music. But once I became born again, and not long afterward, it was a particular Christmas. I was not yet reconciled to my dad and stepmother. I was kind of home alone, sick with the flu over the holidays, and the Lord spoke to my heart, a special Christmas gift. I want you to start singing. And I began to be inspired with songs. Lyrics began to pour into my head, and I began to write them. I started off writing nice, simple, safe folk worship music, and I would sing it in church. And it was nice, and I had a little trio, and I'd sing my stuff in church, and it was very nice, and it was very difficult for me because it was very frightening to get up on that platform. And I said to people, it was like taking your clothes off, you know. It was very vulnerable to get up and sing. But I did it because I believed the Lord had spoken to me. And I got good feedback, and it was encouraging. Then I continued writing and singing, and about midstream in all of this, I began to be inspired to do urban electronica, dance club music. And I thought, I am in trouble. Because I was, you know, living in a Christian culture at that time that said that evil jungle beat is bad. And so I thought, you know, I'm really concerned. You know, is the devil trying to take me astray? So I went to my pastor. I said, I'm being inspired to write this kind of music, these kind of lyrics, you know, to dance club music. And my pastor was very wise, and he said, why don't you continue writing it, and we'll just see where it goes. Sing the safe worship stuff in church, and write this other stuff. We'll see where it goes. And I'm very thankful for that wise counsel. Instead of telling me, drop it, it's evil, run, he gave me a little bit of grace to grow in it and see where it was going to develop. Well, nothing developed in North America. I moved to Asia, and in the plan and time of God, there I meet a producer who was an independent producer, but he did a lot of work with groups like Warner Entertainment, and he was a producer for a lot of Asian pop stars. So we knew the trade. And he said, I hear that you write and sing, and I'd be interested to hear some of your stuff. And at this point, I'd become a worship leader in a major church. And I said, okay, I'll make an appointment. I'll come and I'll do my music with you. And he said, no, I want to hear you sing now. Like right now, right after church, amid all these people? Yeah, just, you know, sing a few bars. And so and he said, I think we can do that. And I was quite floored, you know. I thought, aren't I supposed to wait tables and live in a roach-infested tenement in New York, you know, for 20 years trying to make it? And he just kind of opened the door for me. So my talent is so marginal. My talent is so modest. I'm really a lyricist, not a vocalist. But God always stretches you beyond, and my whole life has been nothing but God taking me further than I ever thought I could. So in this it was the same. And I began my first album. And now I've been recording for almost a decade. And I'm on the Parachute label worldwide, which is a wonderful Christian label making global inroads. I joined a European industrial band, performed an evangelistic four-continent world tour, performing in secular clubs around the world. We saw hundreds of people respond to the Lord, sometimes in just one club. It was a real wake-up call for me, too, because I'd spent so much of my Christian experience in the ghetto, the Christian ghetto, if you will, of only surrounded in the safe, clean bubble of Christianity, that doing the music has gotten me out of that and has allowed me to interact with people of the world far more, which has been so useful, being reminded that Jesus went to Matthew's party. Religious people had a hard time with that. They said, that'll defile you, hanging out with those people. And he didn't hang out there to socialize with them for the sake of socializing. He socialized to represent God's character to them on their turf. And that was the whole mission of our music, which ultimately now, in retrospect, now that I've been recording for a decade, it's opened up doors and platform for me that would have never happened in a pulpit ministry. And that's why I think God bothered. Because you know, with dance club music, the Lord knew at that time, years ago, when I began writing this stuff, that dance club music would become a major global art form. And especially in the sexual arena of party-going people looking for a good time, it is the music that, you know, they embrace. And why not bring light and turn that turf into God's turf? Because even a little light is more compelling than darkness. And I know a lot of Christian performers who are moving in that vein now. And so it's kind of cool to have been a little bit on the cutting edge of that whole effort that now is being realized more routinely, even in Christian circles. It's just one more opportunity to convey God's character to people.
You seem to be a student of pop culture. I know you've taught about redemptive themes in
Yep.
film, and
I love it. I'm fascinated by pop culture. Really, the glue of pop culture is our telecommunications industry and making that even possible. So that whether I grew up in Hong Kong or Rio or Rome, you know, you find this global overlay of culture now. We've kind of rebuilt the Tower of Babel. I love the phenomenon of, for example, film. Film, it's our modern electronic campfire. We don't gather in the tribal circle anymore to hear the stories and fables acted out and told. Instead, our tradition is to sit in the, bathe in the glow of the electronic campfire, the global film industry. And films, they tell you one thing on the surface, but they almost always have a subtext that plays out universally, affecting people more deeply. Whether we consciously recognize it doesn't mean it isn't so. And certainly people who craft film well understand this fact. And as Jesus said, people of the world can have more insight than God's own people. So they know if a film is going to play out around the world, it has to be more than just whiz-bang. It's got to have a deep theme storyline that plays to the universal cry of the human heart. So stories of redemption, stories of justice, triumphing over injustice, being rescued from impossible circumstances, having a bigger-than-life hero who will save the day. These are deep, universal truths that play out regardless of continent or culture. And people who craft good movies understand that about human nature. And I'm fascinated by this, because at the end of the day, God is the giver of clever ideas, witty inventions. And when you look at the founding of, for example, the film capital Los Angeles, the missions post that it originally was, a place where light would be sent, where you see the Jewish community moved to LA and founded the film industry, bringing light to the Gentiles. There they can't escape their destiny. Where even the Jewish community creates and paid for, produced many of the Christian films of the day in the 1950s and 60s, and still. So even though some people think all from Hollywood is bad, well, like everything else that humans touch, it's that famous, glorious ruin, as has been said. There's no question we're made in the image of God. There's no question we're also corrupted. But even there you see the providence of God working 200 years ago to see that films would be created today that speak on a global level to people about redemptive themes. So whether it's sexual redemption and Moulin Rouge, or whether it's justice triumphing over injustice, whether, like in Ben-Hur or Count of Monte Cristo. You see these powerful storylines coming forth. And it's great to get to see that these stories have such powerful redemptive themes, none more obvious than the Passion, but many others leading up to that, part of that building momentum in film around the world. And in my lifetime, never has there been such a discussion of who Jesus is and why he came and what he did on the cross than, for example, just the film The Passion. So when Christians, have this, oh, we can't go and see those movies, they're talking a language that isn't relevant anymore. If you have a personal conviction that you shouldn't see film, there may be good reason why God's convicted you not to. But your conviction isn't a commandment for everybody else. We have to understand it's not America 1950 anymore. We have to move on and realize our civilization is media-oriented and our children are media-savvy, whether it's the technology of the internet or living in a visual, auditory civilization with these compelling images they swim in. We have to teach them now how to navigate in that, not run from it, but discern in it, that it will not sweep them away, and that they can discern truth from lie and not be victimized by it. And I learned that a youth audience, my second largest audience is 18 to 30, and they're very tapped into this understanding. It's important that we give them the skills to discern, so that's why I'm a student, if you will, of pop culture. And I have to be careful, like everybody ought to be. And I know how to wash off if I get defiled. I don't go feeding on things that are going to deliberately defile me. And that dirty field that my generation was told to flee from and abandon seems to be the very field that God is calling a new generation to go and walk in to sow seed. Because while a field may be dirty, filled with manure and dirt and manure wash off your boots, but every farmer knows if you don't go into that field and plant seeds, there'll be no harvest. So I think another generation is being called to the field, not to run from it by fear they might get dirt on them. They're not afraid of the dirt, like my generation has been taught to be.
What do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy, gee, that's such a big, rich word. I don't know that I'm deserving of that I would actually leave a legacy. But if I were to leave a legacy, I think it would be I want to have encouraged people toward God, that I was genuine and the real deal, in whom there was nothing false, and that in spite of all of my handicaps, God transcended that, and that people were brought near God as a consequence. I say it, I want to live to make God rich. I want God to have been happy with me, that He made the effort to redeem me and employ me. I want people to have been encouraged, even if they don't remember the details of all that blather that makes up my lengthy seminar packages and all my multi-word torrent that is a sermon. Even if they don't remember the details, I want them to walk away with the flavor. I want them to have been encouraged in God, challenged, encouraged, brought near Him. What more can a Christian worker do than to be a reflection of God's character to people, and to be a attraction to God's character, an advocate on God's behalf. I want to have done that. That if in 20 years from now, or 100 years from now, or 200 years from now, people comment on what I did, that's what it will be. I encouraged people in God and to want God more and put God first and love Him most.
Oh, I'm going to do the... Oh, this isn't the part where I get to talk about him.
We're living in the Matrix. No, I used
Like you're asking me. Okay. Sigh. So happy you joined us today. a piece of, did you see that floating by?
Bravely spoken.
I think you said you also are a musician. You said you were also a
Okay.
musician.
Would I be able to perform sexually?
And I have some quotes from your wife about the in-bed part, so let me just share those with you.
That's why she's not in this interview. This isn't where I want to go. Oh, I can tell this is going
This
to be
is
an effort.
gonna be hard.
Take two. I was just going to say something very succinct.
Blah, blah, blah.
Maybe I've already...
I hate you. Can I just say that? I want to look right into the camera and say, I hate Cy Rogers.
Maybe I've already said
I was
it.
going to say, did you try steroids? I mean, you missed something.
That's right. Well, of course, then I'd just be a butch sissy, because then I just have big muscles. And, no. But you better not put that on film.
You're known for your speaking ministry, but you're also a singer and a songwriter, and that really surprises people. Peepers. The peepers are the luckiest peepers in the world. Have mercy. We're never going to get through this.